Hello, and welcome to not just another webinar, East Edition series. My name is April Jackson, and I am the Communications Coordinator for East. This is my second year in East, and I am thrilled to help you all learn a little bit more about how to create great content for your podcast. But before we dive into that, let me tell you a little bit about East. If you're unfamiliar with East, but you've chosen to tune in today, we'd like to take this moment to say thanks. Here's just a little bit more information about us. We're an educational nonprofit headquartered in Little Rock. We put industry-grade technology into schools and co-ops and empower students and those who consider themselves to be lifelong learners to solve problems in their community or create service projects in their community that involve technology. With nearly 270 programs spanning across 4 states, which are Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania, we provide learners with the opportunity to have relevant and individualized life-changing experiences. So that's a little bit about East. Let me do a few housekeeping things before we dive into our content. If you would, throughout the presentation, drop your questions in the chat. I'll make sure to pause at the end and do a little bit of Q&A with you guys. So feel free to put stuff there, and don't worry, we'll have a moderator. They'll be answering questions as I go. So if you miss something or if you need anything, make sure you put that in the chat. Also, anything that I talk about during the webinar will also be put in the chat. So any of the downloads or some handouts or anything like that, I'll make sure to put those in the chat, and you guys will have access to them for afterwards when you want to go back and start creating your content. Okay? All right, so let's get started. So let's talk about the history of podcasts for just a second. I promise it's just a second. Won't talk about it for very long. Podcasting started in 2004, believe it or not, and it was developed by an MTV personality named Adam Curry. He worked with his friend Dave Weiner, who was a software developer, and they wrote a program called iPodder that enabled them to automatically download internet radio broadcasts to their iPod. So like several revisions and things later, they came up with the idea, and it was officially known as podcast. So that's the gist of it. Think radio downloaded to a device to carry with you. And that's how we got into podcasting today. So let's talk radio for just a moment. So who actually still listens to the radio? If you do still listen to the radio, think about your favorite personality or interviewer or DJ, if you will, and think about how entertaining it is to listen to them, or if when they start talking, they make you want to click off or change the station. That's what we're trying to avoid with building content for your podcast. We want people to not be able to turn away from what you're doing because it's so great. So tell us about your podcast. Right now, I want everyone to take a moment and rename themselves on the screen and put the title of your podcast or the title that you plan to call your podcast as your name so that people can see it. Then after you changed your name, which if you don't know how to change your name on Zoom, then you can go up to the corner of your screen and look for the little dots in the corner there and click it and click rename, and you'll be able to type it in there. Okay, so if you, once you rename yourself, so we'll know who we're talking to, go ahead and drop it in the chat as well so that people know who you are and where to find you. So ours is the East Update. It can be found on our website at eastinitiative.org, and it's a smaller segment of a larger podcast by the EduTech guys. That's EDU Tech guys, and you can find it on their platform, which is on Spotify, iTunes, Tidal, all of those things. Okay, so we'll put all of that in the chat, and we'll make sure that you guys know how to A, listen to ours, and B, we'll learn how to follow you and listen to yours. So why are you starting your podcast? That's a question you most definitely want to answer for yourself because it's going to help shape your content. If you don't know your why and the people that you're targeting with your content, then you'll be all over the place. some good questions to ask yourself is, what category do I fall into? Am I going to be an opinion-based show? Am I going to be a news-based show? Entertainment-based, education-based? That also determines what your voice should sound like when you start presenting your information or interviewing your guest on your show. You know, news-based things, you have more of your baritone, or you want to sound a little more prominent and serious about things. But if it's opinion-based or entertainment-based, it can be really jovial and light, and you can talk with whomever about whatever. So those are the things. That's the very first question. Ask yourself, why am I starting this podcast, and who do I want to market it to? The next thing you'll want to do is start the prep part of creating your content. Have a plan. If you don't have a plan, then your stuff will be all over the place, and you'll be like, what am I really talking about here? And your listeners will probably be the same way. So you want to brainstorm your topics. Any method of brainstorming is good. Remember back in school when they told you to figure out different ways to take notes or to note the ideas that you have? Pull out one of those activities, pull out one of those charts, and start brainstorming your podcast topics, okay? So even if you are in that developmental stage of, I want to start the podcast, I'm not really sure what it's going to be about or what category it's going to fall in from that previous slide, you'll want to make sure that you brainstorm that, narrow that down, and then decide on topics. Then you'll want to create a list of guests or co-hosts that you'll want to bring in to talk with you on those topics or to help you highlight and promote those topics. So we've brainstormed, we've got topics, create a list of guests and co-hosts, and then when and where you'll promote your content. What's the point of having great content if you're not going to tell people all about it, right? So then once you've gotten all of that together, then we'll get into creating the schedule of your content, because content is not just about what you talk about on your podcast. It's also about how you put it all together. That way, if you decide that you're going to be seasonal or a continuous broadcast of episodes, you're not all over the place. It has a direction that it's going in. Maybe I tune in each week to listen to your podcast to learn a little bit more about how to thread eyebrows. Thread eyebrows is something that I've been interested in. And since we're going through this kind of quarantine thing, I haven't been real adamant about going back out to the salon and getting my eyebrows threaded. So maybe you're talking about that, but that's probably better for a vlog. But you get what I'm saying. You want to talk about how to, you want to make sure that it's in order. First, we'll probably start with washing the eyebrows to make sure they're clean. Then you'll do an episode on like combing them and shaping them. Then you'll talk about how to put the thread around your fingers and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that your topics are there, okay? Next thing you will want to look at is how many episodes, especially if you're doing seasonal, and if your episodes are going to be really long. If you know that you're going to sit and do an education-based one, and it's going to be about debate and philosophy and student development theory, your episodes are probably going to be a little lengthy. So you'll want to know how many episodes you'll have in each season. That way you can either A, chop up content and make 2 episodes from one interview, or B, you know that you need to schedule multiple interviews to create your multiple episodes. Then you'll want to look at days to record. If you don't set aside time to record and edit, which edit is words are hard sometimes, y'all. No, but if you don't set up a day to edit and record, you'll have so much content and you'll get behind, and then you'll be like, oh my gosh, I have to produce today. So make sure you set aside days to record. And it's always good to record multiple podcasts in a day if you can, and then go back and spend time editing them. And we'll get into that a little bit later, not necessarily editing, but setting aside time to record. Editing comes in part 2 of this webinar series a little later on down the line. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. Other things that we could get into is what type of topic, what topic do you want to do first? Again, that's with organizing your episodes, and then booking your guests, because just because you want to talk to someone doesn't mean that they're going to be available on the day that you decide to record. So make sure that you reach out to your guests ahead of time and make sure they are available. And then book good recording spaces, which again, if you're having trouble finding a really quiet space to record, or you don't have, say you don't have the best microphone, then you can always, we'll teach you how to do some different things in the editing session that's coming in a few weeks about removing background noises and things like that. But it's always really good and the end of best practice to record somewhere quietly so that you don't have to manipulate the audio and then it starts to lose its integrity. So after you've brainstormed your topics and you've presented after you've brainstormed your topics and you've talked to your guests, then you have to decide what category this particular episode will fall into. We'll talk about promoting your content. You'll want to make sure that you have all of these things so that promoting your material is super easy. A catchy name, an audio tag or like intro music, a catchphrase or a tagline to go along with your podcast, hashtags so that people can follow along when you make your post and your promotional stuff, and then a logo. We use our standard logo, the East logo, and we put the name up under it. So it's, you know, East Initiative, East Update, or you'll see you'll see the microphone icon and our branded teal and our name East Update and the topic. So, or a fun photo of the guest that we had for that week. So you'll want to make sure that you have all of these things. Our name isn't necessarily super catchy, but for an education-based nonprofit, the East Update does make you want to tune in to see what's been going on in East so that you can get the updates on either how to stay involved, how to volunteer, or just on the really cool things that the students in the various East programs are doing. We don't use an audio tag. What we use is student-produced music. So students can produce music as a project for East or in their spare time, and they send it in, and we try to match it up with what's going on in the interview at that time so that it's complementary. It's called inserting a music bed. But again, we'll get into how to do that in the editing workshop in a couple weeks. Our catchphrase or tagline, if you will, hashtag inspired change, is the same as our actual hashtag, hashtag inspired change. And we also we start and close our podcast with the same opening each time. Okay, so let's get into actually executing your interview. First, you want to make sure that you press record, okay? You probably could have had the most amazing interview, right? But if you don't stop and press record or make sure that you've pressed record, you've lost all that great content, and it's really awkward to ask somebody to have to like recreate a moment. So you want to make sure that you press record. That's step one. And even when you're setting up, that's sometimes when some funny things come about, or you might hear them say something that could be used as a good soundbite for a promo clip. So you want to make sure that you press record before you ever get started. Then you want to test the volume of your mics and make sure that they can be heard and you can be heard, and one person's not really super loud and talking over everything, or that one person is not really super soft and they can't be heard in the mic and they have to get really close to it. You want to make sure that your mic levels are balanced, and that comes into play when you decide what type of device you want to record on. At East, we use a Zoom mic. So it's got the two mic heads on there. It's got a place for us to create levels and things, and it comes with this to capture some of that echoey sound, or if someone over enunciates and it's like a hard T or a hard P, and you get that kind of feedback, the mic cover kind of helps that. And we can adjust from there. And this would be our record button that I try to make sure that we push every time. There we go. Other things to do, you want to set up cues when you're interviewing someone. You can let them know, I'm going to be nodding a lot when you talk because I don't want to talk while you're talking. That way I can easily use your sound bites for promotion, or if it's going to be a free exchange of conversation of back and forth of questions, you can let them know that I'll interject every now and again, but I'm really going to let you lead the conversation. Other things to let them know is when you know, like for me, we usually have pretty lengthy interviews, but I have to condense a 50-minute interview into a 3 to 4 minute segment for the update. Then I tell them, if I give you this finger like this, just the index finger, then that means pause for just a second because I want to get some space in between what you said so that I can easily manipulate or cut that. So that's just a cue that that I use to help people know you're doing a good job. That's the head motion, the smile, yeah, doing a good job. And then give me just a second. Okay, keep going. That kind of thing there. And this is also really good for if you need to check the levels because your guests have changed and one person may speak a little bit louder than the other. Or if that was a really good quote and you want to mark the time when you're recording so that you know how to go back and get to that during your editing process. Also, you'll want to make sure when you have your devices like this, they have a port for you to stick your headphones in. Yeah, you'll want to stick your headphones in there so you can check for background noise. And that way you know just about how much background noise there really is. Sometimes you can't help but to get a little bit of traffic or a lawnmower, ha, or a lawnmower, or your computer's fan as it's cooling. You'll want to just put those headphones in, check for the volume, check for the noise level in the background, and then you can move on from there. So that's all about the like prepping for execution part, right? So then what actually is going to happen during your podcast? Is it going to be guest led? Is it going to be a roundtable discussion? Is it going to be informative, where they're teaching you about something and telling you about a cause that they want to participate in? Is it reflective, where you're going to ask a question and they go into a very reflective moment about a project or a thing that they've done? Or are you just winging it? You know, hey, you just walked in and we're about to record for podcast. Have a seat. Like, let's make it happen. And that way, then you don't have like any prepped questions. You haven't prepped them for anything. You're getting authentic responses right there, right? So decide what kind of interview style you would like for each one of your episodes. And I would recommend that the different interview styles could be used for different topics. So let's get into some of these questions. So I'll go ahead and let you know, all 21 questions that I'm talking about are not featured here on the slide, but they will be in the resources that you guys can get, the link to the resources that you guys have in the chat. So make sure that you click on those and you can see all 21 of the questions with no problem, okay? So, okay, yes. So the first set of questions is always about the icebreaker. You got to break the ice with people. Ask them if this is their first podcast. If they say no, you'll be able to see how comfortable they are. They might just be, nervous Nellies or Neds, depending on who you're talking to. They might just be a little bit nervous. So you want to ask them, is this your first one? Are you nervous about the interview? If they're nervous, ask them what are they most nervous about, and then talk to them a little bit about that. The point is to get them talking where they don't give you 1 and 3 word answers. Oh no, it wasn't like that. Well, can you tell us what it was like? And see, like, you don't want to have to necessarily prompt them to do that. So you want to tell them, you want to get them talking and explaining and expressing themselves so that you have these lengthy chunks of good content to help them build either a story about what they're telling or to let people get to know them. And the get to know you questions come a little bit later on in the interview. Other good things to ask, what sparked your interest in this topic? Because typically that'll get the ball rolling, whatever the topic may be. Threading eyebrows. What sparked your interest in threading eyebrows? Well, really, I started threading my eyebrows because my friends were threading their eyebrows. No, I don't have to do everything that my friends do, but I thought it was cool and it was a cultural thing. And I actually, the first time I went to get my eyebrows threaded, I went to a lady by the name of Bhavna, and she told me about threading from her Indian culture and how they used it for years as a beauty trick and all these different things. And so there you go. That's how I got interested in threading eyebrows. And I could talk for days about that and the trips that I made with my friends. It was bonding. It was girl time. We took one of our guy friends. He got his beard threaded. Didn't even realize you could thread your entire face. So that would get me talking and give you good content about podcasting. And then this is something that always makes them think as well. What do you hope people learn or take away from this? That type of thing. Other good questions to throw in there. Paint me a picture. And a lot of times you have to start a question with a directive, because I know you're like, paint me a picture is not a question, but it's a good lead in for a question. Paint the picture for me. Tell me what happened. And when you give them that directive on the front end, it keeps them from giving you those shorter answers, because if they have to paint the picture, that lets them know that you want a whole lot of detail. Third set of questions is when we get into the really good personality questions, and that helps you get to know them a little bit better. And it could give you a way to redirect some questions back about the topic if things had gotten a little stale, or maybe they gotten emotional about the topic and they needed to take a break. So you lighten it up with some of these personality questions. Some of these are some of my favorites because it really gets people thinking with the whole this or that type of thing. And it's kind of like apples to apples. If you've ever played that game, it helps you get to know them. So then you might be able to connect with them on other topics and bring them back in, or connect them with the resource in the community, which can help them collaborate, which is one of East's favorite things to do to achieve another goal that they have. So let's take a moment and talk about that in the chat for just a second. Are you a chicken nuggets, chicken wings, or a chicken tenders person? For me, it depends on the day and the place. What's your preference? Wings, nuggets, or tenders? Drop it in the chat. While you guys are dropping that in the chat, I am going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about places for you to record, host, and edit. And again, we'll get into edit in a couple weeks. You see how I keep promoting that? That's because me and a good colleague, friend, Mr. Jerry Prince, will be talking about that in a few weeks. And I'm super excited because I was one that had to learn editing for dummies in a quick way when I started this position, because I had been the talent on the podcast, or I had recorded and been the voice on the podcast, but I was not responsible for editing in my past life. So learning to edit was really good. So make sure you tune in for that. But let's talk about ways to capture the content before you got to capture it before you can edit it, right? So Anchor, Adobe Audition, which is something that we use repeatedly at East. That's one of our go-to platforms, Adobe Audition, GarageBand, or Audacity. All of these places, all of these things are places where you can go and record, host, and edit your podcast. And by host, I mean people can go there and listen to your podcast. All of these are downloadable on your devices. If you have an Apple device, GarageBand typically comes with it. Audacity has a free version on the website. Anchor is free in your app store, and we're going to download that in just a second and kind of play in it. And then Adobe Audition comes with the Creative Suite. Other things to consider: SoundCloud. They have a thing where you can get, I think, 90 minutes a month free on their platform. I'll have to double check that. But yes, you can upload your podcast there for free and link it to other places to share out. Spotify, Apple Music, and Tidal. If you are looking to put it on larger platforms that do a little bit of promoting for you, those three would probably be your better ones: Spotify, Apple Music, and Tidal. So you'll want to look into going there. You can host them there and get them and make them monetized. And so I wasn't sure if anybody would be interested in monetizing their podcast, but it's a great way for you to connect with what we call community partners, other businesses in the community that might need you to produce the podcast for them, or interview their talent. I spoke with someone, a community partner of ours, who transitioned their printed newsletter, or they're considering transitioning their printed newsletter into a podcast because they were like, the newsletter is just not getting as many reads as we would like, and it's really good information. So we're going to transition that into a podcast. And so we sat down and talked through everything about that. But what I was explaining to them was sponsors, people will pay for your airtime. So pay for more storage on spaces like SoundCloud, or pay for you to upload longer episodes and things like that on Spotify and Apple Music. Shares and listens, just like on YouTube, there are certain spaces like Tidal, Apple Music, Spotify, that when you share the more shares you get on your podcast, the more money you get paid back. So I think it's like for every 1,000 shares on YouTube, it equates to a certain amount of money. I'm not sure what the conversion is for podcasts, but it is possible. And then paid ads, once you get so many subscribers, again, that was why I asked you guys to put your podcast titles and things in the chat. Once you get so many listeners and shares, people will pay you to advertise their stuff on your podcast. So you want to make sure that you're putting out quality content and showing people how to really showing people that you are a good partner to have. So make sure that you know exactly what you want to do, and then you get into practicing it so that when you actually record with a guest, you can monetize your podcast. So let's get into how to capture some content. If you go to your Google Play Store or your App Store, you can download Anchor for free 99. Yes, it is free. Of course, there's always paid versions, but Anchor is a user-friendly free app that you can host, record, and produce your podcast on. So this is how we share with our students how to do podcasts on the go. If they are out with a community partner, or maybe they just wanted to start their own personal podcast, we encourage them to use Anchor as a tool to do that. So you go there, you download it, you can create an account really quickly. As you see, we created one called East Initiative, and we're going to walk through how to get a few things done in Anchor. So I'll give you guys a second to do that. So after you've downloaded it, it should take you to a screen and ask you if you want to record. That would be that little red button there, and we said we always want to record. If you're watching the webinar by yourself, that's okay. You can still practice recording. This is a good chance for you to practice your intro to your podcast, or if you have a partner or a friend in the room with you, you can practice asking some questions after you do your lead-in. What's a lead-in? I'll give you an example of a lead-in from what we do on the East Update. So for each week, when I get ready to set up the podcast for us, I have to put on my performance voice, and I say, "Hi there, I'm April Jackson, and this is your East Update." So you could practice recording your lead-in, so you'll have some content to kind of play with and save as we move through the rest of that. Again, it doesn't have to be anything super fancy right now because you're just playing around and learning. You can even sing a verse of your favorite song right now, just so you can get about 7 seconds of content to play with in your podcast, inside Anchor, so we can manipulate it a little bit like it's a podcast. Okay, so then after you've done that, after you've recorded something, it asks you if you record it, you press stop and record, then it'll ask you to save it. And as you get ready to save it, it prompts you for these different things. As you see up there in the top corner, the purple button that says publish, you'll want to push that last. That's the very last thing we would push on this app. The next thing you want to pay attention to is want to get paid when people hear this episode. That's the monetizing piece that I talked about. You can activate sponsorships and see how all of that works. Anchor walks you through all of that. Anchor communicates really well with Spotify. So make sure that you note that if you're looking to monetize your podcast. But yes, you'll be able to, it will prompt you to do anything and everything that you could quite possibly think of before you move into publishing. So if you look at the next screenshot that's on the screen, it'll ask you if you want to add background music. So let's say you don't have an audio tag, like East does not use an audio tag, but we love background music, also known as a music bed. We like to use those to give our updates a little more personality and to shed a little light on our students who are in the music producing business. It's not quite a business yet, but I always see our students taking over the world with their great talent. So there you go. But we'll add background music to that. And then you'll want to rename it because it's going to come up as the date. So you'll want the date and the time that it was taken. So you'll want to rename it, and it gives you the chance to do that. And then if you decided to record multiple things, or you stopped yourself and started again to record, those are the different little segments that it's referring to, and you can name each one of those segments, or you can name it as one big segment. We won't get into trimming your start points and end points because that touches on edit, and we'll get that in the next workshop. Okay, so after you rename it, if you see on that second screenshot, I renamed ours from the September 30th to AJ. I put my initials there because I was going to upload that to a shared drive. The school that I was interviewing, and the title of the project that I was interviewing them about for the East update. Then from there, you save it on, I uploaded it to a drive so that I had easy access to it, but this would be once you've saved it and you've added your music and you've done all the extras that it prompts you to do, then you would publish it, okay? So let's get into some questions that you guys probably have about how to make your content a little bit more exciting. Go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we will go from there. I'm gonna be scrolling while you guys are doing that. So what do I suggest? No, okay, I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong. Do I have any advice on how to actively make content better when in the midst of an interview? Sure. If you are in the middle of your interview and it's kind of going south, all right, it's getting stale on you, you can, again, use those cues to tell them take a break, or we're going to pause right here for a second. Or it's really good to be listening into what they're saying so you can kind of redirect the conversation back to something that they showed a little emotion about maybe earlier on, to get them a bit more excited about things. That would be the first step in actively creating better content in an ongoing interview. Another tip that you could use, or another tip that I would give to actively create better content in an ongoing interview, is ask them if they have any questions for you. Do you want to ask me anything? Or and that's pretty open-ended, and sometimes they'll be like, no. Yeah, so you'll want to tell them about yourself. Like if they answered a question very short-ended, then you can go back and answer that question and say, yeah, the last time I got my eyebrows threaded, real tears came down, real tears. I was like, I don't know why the hairs are being stubborn, but they were. And so it gives them something to relate to, and it gives them the opportunity to kind of think of other things, or to realize that they're not out there by themselves. Hopefully, none of you are doing podcasts on how to thread your eyebrows. I really think that would be better suited for a YouTube tutorial, but that was the first thing that came to mind. So we're gonna run with that. Got a few more questions going on here. If you had one piece of advice for people who are starting out with a podcast about creating content, what would it be? I would go back to what we originally talked about at the beginning. What's your why, and who's your target audience? Like, pay attention to the characteristics and the demographics of your target audience. If you don't know who they are, where they hang out, how they already treat people who are in this space, like how they already treat other podcasters, and how they engage with them, I would do some research before I decided to just push it out there, and know that typically without some type of like major cosign, there's not always this overnight success of podcasts or new products or something like that. So be patient with yourself. So I guess my tips would be to do your research on your target audience and make sure you know your why, and then be patient with yourself and your product, because as long as you're putting your heart and soul into it and it's quality, it's, you know, well produced, it will reach people. It definitely will. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, so someone asked about me breaking down the different types of content creating, and one of them was promo. And they were asking, you know, what's the best way to promote your podcast? Personally, I would find some friends that wouldn't mind being on your what I call street team, and that is they are going to push your podcast promotional materials every time you drop a new episode, no matter what. You can get really strategic with them and have different people post different clips, post different advertisements for the different clips. You can host watch parties or listening parties. I'm really trying to get y'all to watch a podcast, but you can host listening parties where you invite people over and they listen, and you have them post on social media about how much they enjoyed the content. You ask your followers or your listeners and subscribers to give you suggestions on who to invite next time for an interview, so that they can feel engaged and involved with that. So those are the types of things that I would do to promote your podcast, especially if you're just starting out. Okay, I have another question here, and it talks about a little bit of why Anchor, and mostly because it's free and it's really user friendly. We are not, sponsored by Anchor, but if Anchor was to hear this and they love to help sponsor an East podcast, we love that. But it's really easy to use. It's really user friendly, and it is free. And so I think when you can get quality for free, it makes it easier for you to focus on what's really important. Asking those questions, I see we got chicken tenders, chicken nuggets, and chicken wing lovers in our comments. So asking those questions to connect with your audience, getting that good logo design, it keeps you from having to worry about editing software, storage, and production and stuff like that. So that is why I would recommend Anchor. Okay, I think that about wraps up the time that we have together today. I'm going to make sure that you guys have the full set of questions, all 21 questions. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us at communications@eaststaff.org. That would be the best way to ask about podcast questions specifically. But before you do that, make sure that you take our survey. You have to tell us how we did. Did we do like awesome, really awesome? No, I'm not going to sway you guys. But if you could take our survey, that would be amazing to help us continue to build great content for our Lunch and Learn series. So it's not just another webinar. Like what I did there, huh? Okay. And don't forget to join us on Facebook Live for the rest of our webinar series. The next one is Maximizing Zoom. I'm sure she has a way more creative name than that. But we're going to be talking about how to maximize Zoom with our Director of Events, Ms. Jessica Dunham. She has become our kind of in-house guru on Zoom and a lot of its features. So make sure that you tune in for that. And if you can't tune in for that particular one, you can always catch it later on YouTube. Thank you guys so very much for tuning in. If you have any questions again, or if you're just interested in learning more about East, you can scan this barcode right here and it'll take you to our website. And we will be happy to get back in contact with you and help you continue to inspire change in your own way. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm April Jackson, Communications Coordinator for East, and this has been 21 questions on how to create great content for your podcast.